All right, let's jump into another deep dive.
Okay.
And today we're going to be looking at something that might be a little bit unexpected.
Okay.
We're going to be diving into
Uh-huh.
sanitation practices
Okay.
in 16th century Geneva.
Interesting.
So get ready to be surprised because what we think of as dirty medieval times
Mm-hmm.
might be a lot more complex
Okay.
than you think.
Okay.
And we're going to be using these amazing city council records from Geneva.
Very cool.
Minutes of meetings, ordinances,
Yeah.
even complaints from grumpy neighbors.
Right.
We've all have them.
I love those.
Yeah.
Those are always
They're
fun.
the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these records really offer a fascinating glimpse into daily life,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to
Yeah.
everything that comes out of humans and animals.
Uh-huh.
So imagine Geneva, bustling city,
Yeah.
heart of the Reformation.
Right.
John Calvin preaching his sermons,
Yeah.
but also people tossing their scraps out the window, keeping manure piles in the street.
Okay.
How does that compute?
Uh.
Were they truly a dirty city,
Uh-huh.
or were they actually ahead of their time in
Okay.
terms of public health?
Mm.
That's what we're here to figure out.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting because,
Yeah.
when we think about waste disposal back then,
Yeah.
it was very different.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing,
Yeah.
there were no garbage cans as we know them.
So just throwing it in the street?
Pretty much, the word garbage wouldn't even exist for another 300 years.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so no designated bins,
No.
but paved streets.
Right.
I'm picturing something like
Yeah.
those charming cobblestone streets you see in
Yeah.
Europe, but with,
Yeah.
occasional surprises.
Well, you're actually spot on.
Okay.
So, yeah, by the mid-1500s, Geneva City Council
Yeah.
was pushing hard
What?
to pave the streets. In
Yeah.
fact, residents were required
Oh, wow.
to pave in front of their homes.
Mm-hmm.
The council saw this as a key step
Yeah.
towards a cleaner, more orderly city.
Okay, so maybe not the open sewers and piles of film
Not quite.
we often imagine.
Right.
But what about those manure piles?
Mm,
The records mention them quite a bit.
right.
Were they just ignoring the smell?
Well, the smell was definitely a concern,
Yeah.
but it wasn't their only motivation.
Okay.
So the city council actually saw manure as a
Mhm.
valuable resource.
Okay.
Farmers would use it to fertilize their fields.
Oh, so it's like pre-modern recycling.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Remember, this was long before the days of synthetic fertilizers.
Oh, right.
Right.
So that actually connects to
Exactly.
the modern debate about
Yeah.
composting and urban farming.
Yeah.
Who knew 16th century Genevans were so eco-conscious?
Well, and what's fascinating is
Yeah.
their approach to waste wasn't simply about disposal.
Okay.
They were trying to integrate it
Yeah.
back into the cycle of life. So it raises the question,
Okay.
what if their waste was
Mhm.
actually less wasteful
Yeah.
than our modern methods?
It really makes you think, right?
Yeah.
We were so focused on
Uh-huh.
keeping things separate,
Uh-huh.
trash here,
Uh-huh.
compost there.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something to be said
Right.
for that more integrated approach. Okay, but I have to ask about those geese and pigs
Yeah.
roaming the streets.
Right.
Was that just part of the city's charm?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
The city council minutes show them struggling to
Oh.
regulate these free-ranging animals.
Uh-huh.
They recognized that having livestock wandering around
Mm.
could contribute to unsanitary conditions,
Mhm.
but it seems like it was a constant battle,
Imagine-
like trying to get people to
Yeah.
pick up after their dogs today.
So they were already grappling with that tension between individual freedoms
Yeah.
and public health concerns.
It's like a time capsule
Oh, it
on
is.
city planning dilemmas.
It really is
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about the animals.
Okay.
The council records also reveal their concern for human waste disposal,
Okay, let's dive into that.
which, as you might imagine, was a bit more complex.
Tell me about these licenses and
Yeah.
prives, the terms that they used for toilets.
So these terms provide a window into their sanitation infrastructure.
Yeah.
Public toilets, or licenses,
Okay.
were a source of constant debate.
So where to put them?
Where to put them?
Yeah.
Placing them was a balancing act.
Yeah.
Close enough for convenience,
Right.
but far enough to avoid unpleasantness.
Yeah, I can only imagine the complaints.
Right.
Is the records mention anything?
Unfortunately, that remains a bit of a mystery.
Okay.
Yeah, the records don't specify any cleaning methods.
Gotcha.
But what we do see are disputes between neighbors
Okay.
over the placement and condition
Yeah.
of private toilets.
It seems some things never change.
It seems not.
Yeah, it's almost comforting to know that people have always been complaining about their neighbors.
Yeah.
But it also humanizes
this
these
is-
historical figures.
Yeah.
It does. They
Right.
weren't just
Yeah.
names in a textbook.
Yeah.
They were dealing with real life problems,
Right.
just like us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
And Those disputes over toilets
Right.
highlight another recurring theme in
Yeah.
city council records, which is constant struggle to balance individual needs
Yeah.
with the well-being of the community.
It's like that old saying,
Yeah.
your freedom to swing your fist
Yeah.
ends where my nose begins.
Right, right.
Or in this case, maybe it's your freedom to have a smelly toilet.
Exactly.
Ends where my fresh air begins.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how the city council tried to navigate
Yeah.
these issues. They were
Yeah.
constantly weighing competing interests
Yeah.
and making decisions that impacted the lives of everyone in Geneva.
So they were like early urban planners,
Right.
grappling with the same dilemmas we face today.
Yeah.
Things like zoning laws,
Yeah.
noise ordinances,
Yeah.
even building codes.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about those plague outbreaks they were dealing with.
Yeah.
How did that impact?
Well, you have to remember that their understanding of disease was very different from ours.
Right.
They didn't have the germ theory of disease.
Okay, so they didn't know about...
They didn't know about bacterial and viruses.
So how did they explain the spread of illness?
They had various theories, often involving bad air or
Okay.
imbalances in the body,
Uh-huh.
but they did recognize that filth and disease often went hand in hand.
Uh-huh.
That's why they were so focused on keeping the streets clean
Yeah.
and regulating things like
Yeah.
manure piles and stray animals.
It's like the pre-scientific versions of
Exactly.
public health initiative.
Precisely.
Yeah, they were trying to control what they could,
Yeah.
even if they didn't fully understand the
Yeah.
mechanisms behind it.
And this brings us to
Yeah.
one of the most striking examples of their efforts to combat disease.
Okay?
The order to kill all
Yeah.
stray dogs and cats
Oh, wow.
in the city in 1543.
That seems incredibly harsh.
It was a drastic measure.
I mean, I know they were dealing with
Yeah.
a plague outbreak,
Absolutely.
but still.
But you have to remember the context.
Right.
Plague was a terrifying and deadly disease that
Yeah.
they were desperate to stop its spread.
Right.
And based on their understanding at the time, they believed that animals could transmit the disease.
And it's a reminder that our perception
Yeah.
of what's ethical and acceptable
Yeah.
is constantly evolving,
Yeah.
right? What seems barbaric to us today
Yeah.
might have been seen as a necessary act of
Mm.
public health back then.
It also highlights the power of fear
Yeah.
in shaping public policy.
Yeah.
When people are afraid,
Right.
they're often willing to accept measures
Yeah.
that they might otherwise find objectionable.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
While those drastic measures stand out,
Uh-huh.
it's important to remember that the city council was also engaged in
Right.
more mundane but equally important sanitation efforts.
Like what?
For instance, the records detail,
Okay.
their efforts to ensure that private toilets, those pre-bays we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
were properly constructed and maintained. They even had inspectors
Oh,
who
wow.
would go into people's homes to check for compliance.
Talk about invasive.
They would certainly raise some eyebrows.
Can you imagine a city inspector coming into your home today
Right.
to check your toy?
But for them, it was
Yeah.
all part of their mission to
Right.
create a healthier and
Yeah.
more sanitary city.
Right.
And while their methods might seem intrusive to us,
Yeah.
they did reflect a genuine concern for the well-being of the community.
So they were basically walking a tightrope
Right.
between personal freedom and public health,
Exactly.
just like we do today.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think about those parallels.
That's precisely what makes
Yeah.
these historical records so relevant.
Yeah.
They remind us that the challenges we face today are not entirely new.
Right.
They're part of a long and complex human story,
Right.
and understanding that story
Right.
can give us valuable insights into our own time.
So what can we learn from those 16th century Genevans?
Yeah.
They had their manure piles and
Right.
well questionable methods of
Uh,
pest control, but they
Right.
were also striving to create
yeah.
a clean and healthy environment.
Right.
What's the takeaway here?
I think the key takeaway is that
Yeah.
progress isn't always linear.
Uh-huh.
The Genevans might not have had our scientific understanding of disease
Yeah.
or our technological solutions, but they were making genuine efforts to
Yeah.
improve their lives.
Right.
And in some ways, their approach to waste management, with
Yeah.
its emphasis on reuse and integration,
Right.
might actually be more sustainable
Mm-hmm.
than our current practices.
So maybe those manure piles weren't so bad after all.
It's all a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah, what seems gross to one generation might be seen as innovative
Absolutely.
or even eco-friendly by another.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what future generations will think of our plastic water bottles and our disposable coffee cups.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's all about perspective
Yeah.
and the evolution of societal norms.
Right.
What we consider clean or dirty
Yeah.
is constantly being redefined by
Right.
new knowledge, technologies,
Yeah.
and cultural values.
So as we wrap up our deep dive
Right.
into the sanitation practices of
Right.
16th century Geneva,
Uh-huh.
what's the big picture takeaway for you?
I think it's a reminder
Yeah.
to be humble about our own assumptions.
Hmm.
We often look at the past and
Yeah.
judge it through the
Mm.
lens of our modern sensibilities.
Uh-huh.
But these city council records show that
Right.
even in a time that we might consider primitive,
Uh-huh.
people were grappling with complex issues
Yeah.
and striving for a better life.
It's like that saying, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes.
Right.
Or maybe in this case, don't judge a city's sanitation practices
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
you've
So
smelled their manure pile.
it's all about context and
Yeah.
understanding. And I think that's the beauty of history,
Yeah.
is challenges us to step outside of our own time and place and
Yeah.
to see the world through different eyes.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We went from picturing filthy streets
Right.
to uncovering a surprisingly complex system
Yeah.
of waste management
Uh-huh.
and public health initiatives.
Right.
Who knew those 16th century Genevans were so forward-thinking?
They were dealing with
Right.
many of the same fundamental challenges
Yeah.
that we face today,
Yeah.
just with different tools
Right.
and understandings,
Right.
and their efforts to balance individual freedoms
Right.
with the well-being of the community.
Are just as relevant now as
Uh-huh.
they were back then. So the next time you're tempted to complain about
Yeah.
taking out the trash
No.
and sorting your recycling,
Right.
think of those Genevans and
Hmm.
their manure piles.
Exactly.
It might just give you
Yeah.
a new perspective on our modern conveniences.
And maybe even inspire you to be a little more mindful of
Yeah.
your own impact on the environment.
Right.
After all, history shows that
Yeah.
the choices we make today will shape the world
Yeah.
for generations to come.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we'll leave you to ponder
Okay.
the sanitation practices of the future.
All right.
What will they think of us?
I don't know.
Only time will tell.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into this surprisingly fascinating world
Yeah.
of 16th century sanitation.
It's been fun.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep exploring,
Absolutely.
keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Dive dick.